Hi everyone, I'm Any New Province, and this week we're going to find out if Impassioned Orator is possibly Pauper Playable. We're trying something a little bit different for the deck tech this week. The deck list won't be on screen for the entire time like it usually is, but you can check it out in the description down below. While you're down there, if you wouldn't mind liking the video and subscribing to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you're enjoying everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. All right, let's get into the deck tech. Sometimes we're looking at downshifts for the 5th copy of an existing effect. Impassioned Orator, on the other hand, represents the 13th to 16th copy in mono white alone. For this deck, I decided to try out all 16. This is a deck I'm calling 16 Sisters. The card we're trying out this week is called Impassioned Orator. It costs 1 and a white for a 2/2, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Soul's Attendant and Soul Warden are our 1-drop versions of Impassioned Orator. They come down a bit earlier, but gain us 1 life when creatures enter the battlefield all the same. Suture Priest is joining them a little further up the curve, but comes with the added ability of draining an opponent whenever a creature enters the battlefield on their side. Ideally, we'll go turn 1 Soul Sister into turn 2 Soul Sister before committing a ton of creatures to the board while taking advantage of the Soul Sister's effects. We have a few ways to get lots of creatures on board, starting with our token producers. Battle Screech is one of the strongest cards in the Pauper format for stealing the Monarch or for blocking fairies. Triplicate Spirits costs a bit more but can easily be convoked out on turn 3 if we curve into our sisters correctly. Finally, we have Squadron Hawk to not only help commit a ton of creatures to the battlefield that can get in for evasive damage, but also to refill our grip when we run out of gas. If we can keep a couple of Soul Sisters on board while our swarm of birds and spirits burgeons, we should be able to almost ignore whatever our opponent is doing to our life total while we peck in evasive damage over the next couple of turns. Our hand is going to empty out pretty quickly if we're only relying on Squadron Hawk to stock up. That's why we're running 3 copies of Survival Cache as a synergistic white divination. There are going to be games where our life total may actually be lower than our opponent's, but we can almost always count on eventually drawing 2 cards off of this. Even if we've gained nearly infinite life, we'll have to close out the game somehow. That's where our anthems come in. Let's start by having a look at Marshalling Cry. This has to be my favorite mono white anthem because it lets you dig for what you need while still being useful in the graveyard. Marshalling Cry providing vigilance also enables our second anthem, Taw Crop Elite. You normally have to take a turn off with this bird after you use it to pump your team. However, if we can give it vigilance, we can use it to pump every turn until it eventually has to tap. Finally, we've got Ravnica Rally as a surprise free way to save our creatures from those main deck electricaries. If everything goes as planned, we'll have a huge board of creatures staring down our opponent when it's time to alpha strike. Once we are this wide, 1 anthem should do the trick, but occasionally we'll only have enough creatures that will need 2 anthems to do the job. Our mana base is nice and simple. We have 13 basic planes to make sure we can hit our Soul Sisters on turn 1. Then we have 4 copies of Radiant Fountain to get our life total up high enough that Survival Cache definitely draws us a card, and finally we have 4 copies of Secluded Steppe as cycling lands to make sure we're drawing into the right cards when we need them. In the sideboard, we have 4 copies of Celestial Flare to make sure Boggles can't race us. We have 2 copies of Ravnica Rally to bring in against red decks who are going to try to kill our creatures with Electricity. We have 3 copies of Standard Bearer for picking up all of Stompy's pump spells and all of Boggles' auras. We have 2 copies of Dust to Dust because I bet the affinity matchup is kind of bad. We have 2 copies of Prismatic Strands for fogging our opponent's alpha strikes, and 2 copies of Leave No Trace to blow up all the enchantments of a similar color. And there you have it, 16 Sisters. We're going to be taking this deck into a league at twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince this Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Atlantic time. We're there every Tuesday night playing Possibly Pauper Playable decks. I hope you enjoyed this new deck tech format. You can let me know in the comments down below, and while you're down there, if you could leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Tuesday night.